This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Welcome to a new edition of Behind the Headlines. I'm Charlie Greenewalt, Senior Fellow for the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy, and I'm joined by my co-host, Maura Donnelly. Welcome, Maura.
Hello, Charlie.
Why, it's a new year. We have a new budget being proposed by Governor Corbett. Interestingly enough, this will be 3 years in a row that it looks like he'll have a budget on time, when Governor Rendell had 8 years when no budget on time. And it looks like it'll be a balanced budget. And this particular balance looks like a delicatessen. It looks like there's a little bit for everyone, isn't there?
Well, I think the good thing about this budget is finally there's some time for growth where there hasn't been the last couple of years. I think that's really good news. So there is an opportunity to, create a little bit, spread the wealth, so to speak. So I think that's good.
And we have one of the best experts in the state to talk about the governor's budget in Dave Patti. Dave, welcome back to the show. Dave, of course, you are the president and CEO of the Pennsylvania Business Council, and we welcome you to the show and welcome your expertise. Mara, why don't you start out?
We kept hearing leading up to the budget, the governor's office was leaking a few things here and there, but we heard there were going to be some big surprises. Did you see any big surprises in the overall budget, or do you think it was pretty predictable?
Well, if you're here in town all the time, maybe they're less of a surprise than to those out there in the rest of Pennsylvania and in the real world. But I think that you touched on maybe the surprise being that this is the first, what I would call the first real Tom Corbett budget. I mean, when he first came in, you have 1 month as the new governor to figure out how all of this works. Mm-hmm. You're essentially trapped with the last governor's budget and numbers to which you can tinker. And they looked at the last governor's budget, Governor Rendell's budget, and said, wow, this is about $4 billion out of balance. We have some real tough choices to make. Mm-hmm. And they decided they were going to stick to their pledge of no tax increase and do it with cuts. So that was described as draconian and all kinds of horrible terms. But it was among very few choices that were available to the governor. Last year's budget, I think, allowed him to now, as the national recession, the global recession was starting to lighten, not end, but lighten, to start to move things around, take care of administrative things, try and start retooling government, but line things up for a budget he really wants. I think this is closer to that as you see him putting money into education, into welfare. As you heard him, I think, if anything, he was most impassioned when he was talking about people with disabilities. I mean, that's the real Tom Corbett that I think a lot of people didn't see for the first 2 years, who is not thrilled with just slashing and burning, but wants to hold the line on spending, thinks that's the best way to make Pennsylvania competitive again. At the same time, he takes care of human services and real needs.
It seems, Dave, that the last few budgets that Governor Rendell put forth were budgets that old expression that we hear all the time, and kick the can down the road, that they didn't address the major problems of the state. They just tried to get by until the next year. It seems like Governor Corbett, however, has rolled up his sleeves, and he is perhaps not solving these problems overnight, but he's trying to address them. For example, the transportation issue. Do you want to talk about that for a moment? Of course, Act 44 said that we would toll Route 80, we'd raise the tolls on the turnpike, and this revenue would pay for our transportation infrastructure, building and repair, and a little bit for mass transit in Philly and Pittsburgh as well. Now, the tolling in the I-80 didn't work out, so the turnpike is going millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in debt. What does this budget do, and what's the governor's proposal to deal with this, Dave?
Well, my organization and I personally supported Act 44, and I don't think that was disingenuous on the part of the Rendell administration. I don't think that was a kicking it down the road. I think they literally thought that their connections to the Obama administration, that they might be able to get what was not possible in the Bush administration, to get approval to be the third demonstration project, if you will, the third highway that was tolled in I-80. And the numbers work there, but only if I-80 is told, as you said. So what Governor Corbett had done was first to reestablish the baseline by having his Transportation Funding Advisory Commission meet, reassess what was done in the Rendell administration in terms of problems, and they very quickly agreed that's more or less a pretty good inventory of the issues, and then look again at the options for funding. What can we do? they were given a real menu, or I should say the commission gave the governor a real menu from which to choose, but some of those options have a lot of political pain to win passage, but yield very little revenue. So in terms of what really gives enough revenue, given that all the commission says that we have something like a $2 to $3 billion per year shortfall in maintenance, not adding new capacity, not adding new lanes, but just maintenance. The most structurally deficient bridges in America, something like 6,000 bridges that are structurally deficient. And I don't think you have to be an engineer to know, gee, given the choice, I don't really want to drive on something called structurally deficient or have my 5-year-old in a school bus going over that every day. So they understood the problems. They understood that we have to get a lot of money and decided that the oil franchise tax, which is a tax at the wholesale value of fuel, paid by the retailer to the wholesaler, then remitted to the state. It's been artificially capped. It was when we put that tax in place, it was put in with this kind of assumption, well, the price of fuel will never go up, the wholesale price will never go up above $1.25 a gallon. So for some reason it was constructed as if that would always be the case. Now obviously the prices of fuel today are much higher, so the tax stops taking any impact after $1.25. What the governor decided to do is to ease the impact at the pump for commuters, for people who buy fuel, that over the next 3 years, that cap will slowly be lifted to a full market rate. What that will do at the end of 3 years is give the state something like another $1.9 billion. So it gets us about 2/3 of the way to where we need to be with the problem. In the short run, the governor wants to take down, because we actually have 2 different fuel taxes in Pennsylvania, he wants to take down by a penny each year the regular gas tax at retail that we see at the pump, so that it mitigates the other increase for the first couple of years. You may see some lawmakers who say, well, gee, I understand the optics and the politics of that, but nonetheless, I think we need the money. We don't want to do that. But his offer to the legislature was, I will help you with the political aspects of this by trying to ease that pain on people who are buying fuel. But sticking to an idea that buying fuel and paying your tax that way is a user fee on those who use the roads. So that if it's somebody who is retired, sits in their home, doesn't drive much, they're not going to pay much. And I think that's what he's trying to do.
You touched on the fact that the governor touted the fact that there had been $4.2 billion in deficit reduction in the state of Pennsylvania without any tax increase. I doubt there are many governors across the nation that can say that they made it through the last couple of years without any tax increases. One of the biggest parts of his proposal that he didn't mention in his speech was some business tax reductions, which haven't happened in a lot of years.
Right.
You want to touch a little bit on that plan?
Well,
and
one thing that we've done for the last 2 years in those budgets, and you're right, I mean, it's really a remarkable record to reduce state spending, in fact, from one year to the next, which he did in the beginning, and to hold the line at inflation or below inflation over 3 years of budgets now. But we have continued on what was supposed to be a 10-year phase out of the capital stock and franchise tax. And without going into a lot of details, this is a tax on the asset value that a firm has. Problem is, you pay that tax whether or not you're making any money. You don't have to have any sales. You still have assets. You pay the tax. That's what people call a top-line tax. So it is very tough to pay in years where sales are bad during a recession, and it's been tough on the business community. Moreover, most of the states in America have either a tax of that sort on assets, or they have a tax on the bottom line, on profits. Pennsylvania was one of only 2 that has a tax on both. So when you look at Pennsylvania, it's a very uncompetitive place to be. So the business committee for years has said, let's start working on this. And we started that in the Ridge administration. It's taken 14 years instead of 12, but at the end of instead of 10, but at the end of this year, it's going to be gone. So that's very, very important.
It's quite an accomplishment.
It's really an accomplishment. The other thing that, and there's a great little supply side in there, a quick aside, that while the tax rate kept going down, the revenues were holding even, which means people were reinvesting in assets because the asset book value was going up. So there was a nice little supply side story there. But the other side to that he's now identifying is, or has always identified but is now taking action on, is our corporate net income tax is 9.99%. Only Iowa has a higher marginal rate. Their last category is 12%. So we are the highest flat rate, second highest marginal rate, however you want to go. It's big. And that, yes, there are deductions and everything to make your effective rate lower, but the optics of that when DCD is trying to sell Pennsylvania,
Right.
trying to attract firms to
Perception.
come here. The perception is that you're the highest taxes in America. Why should I go there? And remember that America has the highest corporate tax rates in the world, so that makes Pennsylvania the worst place in the world to do business in terms of corporate tax rates. So to reduce that, what the governor wants to do is start phasing that down. It might take 15 years, but he'd like to move more to the national average around 6.99 from the 9.99. So it's not going to start right away. It's not going to be done all in one step. It's going to take a long time. But I think the perception of Pennsylvania as a place that is slowly but surely continuing to make progress towards a better climate will help us to bring more jobs in. And then that'll be balanced with some net operating loss carry forward and a lot of other arcane things that probably nobody who watches the show wants to know anything about.
Yeah.
But it really meaningful to those who are the accountants and the bookkeepers.
Right.
Can you simplify for our viewers, and can you break it down in just a minute or two to tell us how the governor has chosen to tackle the question of pension reform? This is referred to as the ticking time bomb that is going to bedevil not only Pennsylvania but many states. What did the governor propose? Because he has addressed this as well, hasn't he?
Right. Well, public sector pensions. So for state workers, teachers, firefighters, police, municipal workers, tend across Pennsylvania to be what we would call a defined benefit. In other words, you're going to get a certain proportion of your salary after you retire, regardless of what the markets do. What's happened between the markets being bad, as everyone else who has a 401k defined contribution system knows, is that the value isn't there. There have been a lot of mistakes, not by the employees themselves. They have made their contributions throughout, and I think the governor tried to recognize that. But the state hasn't always put in as much money as it should, and now catching up because the deficit is tremendous. It is eating the rest of the budget. We can't make payments fast enough, and soon, if we keep on the system we're on and the path we're on, we will have no money for education, for welfare programs, for other discretionary spending. It will just dominate.
How'd the governor address it, Dave?
What he wants to do is to keep every retiree will have everything that they always had, and nothing will change. But that all new employees will move into something like a 401k, and that for existing employees that were given in 2001 or 2002 an increase in the percentage by which their pension is calculated, that will be rolled back. They will keep the money that they accrued during that time period. They will have an opportunity to buy, by contributing more, buy a higher rate later on to continue the 2.5 multiplier. And then there'll be some other little administrative changes, but it can save hundreds of millions of dollars in the general fund budget in the first couple of years. And yes, it won't be everything that people thought in the last 10 years they were going to get, but if you started a job with the state 20 years ago, you're back to where you were in terms of the deal offered to you, and you will keep that extra lump sum from the middle kind of chunk where the legislature took the multiplier up.
Well, we're probably going to have you back to talk about education issues because we are running out of time, but just thoughts on privatization and money going towards education.
Well, I mean, I think that the important thing is even just under the general fund, the governor's going to put more money into education than we've ever had before. $5.5 billion in K through 12. Total of about nearly $10 billion in state resources goes to education. So, I mean, it's not that we're not funding education. What he has said is that if we can sell the state stores and privatize liquor, there'll be a one-time windfall of about $1 billion to the state. And he's willing to take that entire $1 billion and put that into education programs.
Great.
Okay, thank you very much for being here. Thanks for throwing some light on this new budget. And we look forward to having you back pretty soon, Dave, to see how the budget is progressing through the legislature.
Great.
And we'll be keeping you guys up to date as well as this budget progresses. We'll be right back with the second segment of Behind the Headlines in a second.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Pennsylvania Business Council, envisioning a commonwealth in which residents enjoy a very high quality of life in sustainable communities. The Council works aggressively to define key long-term policy strategies and solutions that make the Commonwealth more competitive, creating and sustaining a better Pennsylvania. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, helping hospitals to provide healing, health, and hope to communities across the state. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by Daily Underwriters of America, a better way for truck insurance. And by Penn Waste, your best local choice for your waste removal and recycling needs.
Hi, welcome back to the second segment of Behind the Headlines. On this segment, Maura and I are being joined by a member of the Susquehanna Valley Center's Board of Directors and also the owner of Penn Waste, one of the largest businesses in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Scott Wagner. Scott, thanks very much for joining us again. We're so happy to have you here as we start a new year and a new legislative session. You really have focused like a laser beam on a few legislative issues. And one of the biggest issues is workers' compensation. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your quest to improve this, and you've worked with other members of the business community. You've worked a lot on your own. What progress is being made, Scott?
Well, to answer your question, no progress is being made, and this has been a sort of a pet peeve of mine for probably 20 years.
It affects you directly.
It affects our company directly, and it affects other businesses throughout the Commonwealth. Workers' comp is a system that was set up years ago, and it was set up. It was well-meaning, and it was set up for a purpose to protect an employee working for a company in Pennsylvania if they were injured. And the system has, changed over the years, and I would say, these are my opinions and my estimates, I would say that probably 70% of the cases that are in the system are legitimate cases, and 30% of the cases that are in the system, are not legitimate cases.
Is that pretty much based on what you've found in your own business over the course of many years?
Yes. Okay. I mean, we're talking the case, for example, we just settled a case in December that went on for 3 years, and this notebook represents one case. One case.
For one person.
One person. And what happened in this case, this person came to work for us, employee came to work for us in July of 2009, on the 1st of July, and somewhere on around August the 10th, approximately 6 weeks later, this employee, after being employed by our company for 6 weeks, came, approached our HR department and said, I was injured about 2 weeks ago, and I want to report this injury. Well, we didn't hear anything about the injury, 2 weeks prior, and so, as an employer in the state of Pennsylvania, a legitimate employer, we have to go through a certain process. So we sent the employee to a med center for examination. Obviously, we couldn't. We would have done a post-accident drug and alcohol screen, but it's 2 weeks after later, the fact. Yeah. Through the process of this case, we learned that this employee was a former semi-pro boxer. Young man's in his 30s, and as a semi-pro boxer, you take hits here and here, okay, in your shoulders. He had rotator cuff damage, and again, alleged that it happened on the job. So, we have now paid for 2 rotator cuff surgeries. The employee, the claimant, was on his 3rd attorney in December. And this case just drug on, and we have been paying the wages for almost the 2.5, approaching 3 years of the process of this case. At the end of the day, this employee, and this is our opinion, this is my opinion, and I have a strong opinion about this, that this employee was injured, not working for Penn Waste, and he was probably not injured working for a company. And as a semi-pro boxer, probably was in a boxing ring somewhere getting paid cash, and he was injured, and he needed someone to pay for his injuries, because in that type of business you don't have health insurance. Mm-hmm. So I think we were picked as a victim company, and as a result, the total cost of this case was almost $200,000. Again, it doesn't include the man hours involved by our HR director and other people involved. So this case was settled out in December because
this is one employee out of how many total employees does your company have?
We have approximately 350 employees.
350 employees, and this is just one, and it's $200,000.
Correct.
Takes one's breath away.
Well, to further take your breath away, I'm going to be real conservative when I tell you this, but in the state of Pennsylvania, I firmly believe that there are 25 workers' comp fraud cases every single day. Monday is a big day, and that cases are reported because an employee may be out playing football on Sunday afternoon with their college buddies or their high school buddies, and the game gets rough, somebody gets injured, and maybe they don't have health insurance. So they walk in the next day, whether it's football, baseball, or something, or volleyball, walk in the next day, Monday, and report to their employer, I was hurt on Friday.
Well, let me ask you something. You've got this, you went through it. I'm sure you at some point said it wasn't us. It was a pre-existing condition. There's something wrong with this situation. I'm sure that was one of your main arguments. What can be changed in the system to make that a legitimate argument to fight cases like this?
Well, I think what we're asking for, and we have a workers' comp attorney who has been practicing workers' comp law for almost 30 years, and we have met. I sent a letter to the governor a year ago, and I got a response from his staff, and we talked a little bit about this issue and other issues. So I was directed to someone at L&I. So we went to
Labor and
Industry. We went over and we met with a group of people at Labor and Industry. Took our HR director along, our workers' comp attorney, and as a result of that meeting, for the last almost a year, we're coming up on probably 10 months, 9 or 10 months, we have proposed changes, and some of these changes are that, number one, that when an employee becomes injured, they have to use the panel of doctors that we have listed as a company for 90 days. That panel period should be extended for a longer period of time.
What's the purpose of the panel of doctors?
It keeps the employee, and it talks about, again, in our recommendations, if an employee, for example, if this employee goes to a doctor and the doctor says, you're really not injured, the employee then could go to another doctor. He can doctor shop. It's called doctor shopping.
Yeah.
Sure.
So he will continue to go to a doctor until that doctor tells him what he wants to hear that benefits his case. So it keeps, there are sort of rules and guidelines, and it's the system. And we're asking that the panel period be extended from the 90-day period to a longer period. But we're again, some of this we're requiring that only one provider at a time may prescribe scheduled medications in order to prevent doctor shopping and drug seeking behavior from being rewarded. We have had instances where our employee has gone to a med center and the doctor has prescribed 30 days of OxyContin. Well, that person should have only been given maybe 5 to OxyContin or a week's worth of OxyContin instead of 30 days. There is a huge prescription drug problem, and there are instances where some of the excess drugs are being sold into the market. So it's almost, it's a system. We have a system that is it's encouraging bad behavior. It's requiring a second point, requiring periodic testing of all claimants receiving scheduled medications to ensure that abuse and actual use, as opposed to selling of the medications, is not occurring. Such testing would be required to be done by the prescribing provider after the first 90 days of prescription of such substances. We're also we're asking for in the Act to explicitly provide in the Act that a WCJ, which is a workers' comp judge, may order or direct detoxification of a claimant either by inpatient or outpatient means. Another point we're asking for.
That's pretty huge.
It is huge.
Yeah.
It is huge. I mean, the workers' comp system is really is encouraging and aiding this prescription drug problem.
Right.
And I can tell you that that there is a portion of the drugs that are being prescribed to some of these claimants are being sold on the street. That's illegal. That's a crime. So we need to tighten up on this.
Yeah.
We're asking, and again, the governor's office has suggested that I could go to the Attorney General's office on this case, but what we're asking for is establishment of a specific anti-fraud unit in the insurance department or the Attorney General's office to deal with the workers' compensation fund. I wrote a letter to the governor back in December of last year, and I got a response back and said, that I should go to the Attorney General's office and file a complaint. Hey, listen, here's the end of the day. And for any business owners that are sitting out there, we don't have a lot of time just to create another one of these.
And this is heavy.
and have my workers' comp attorney or have my HR department involved in filing a complaint. Listen here, this is the bottom line. Our $200,000 or close to $200,000 is gone. It's gone. So what are we going to do? Just continue to throw money after bad? Let's get our arms around this system, and let's get the system more streamlined. But one of the biggest things that we're asking for, and this is where L&I is not doing their job, the labor and industry, we're asking for the streamlining of the Workers' Compensation Appeal Board process to require that decisions be issued within a specific period of time, and by requiring that board members be attorneys and have experience in the handling of workers' compensation claims, either representing claimants, employers, insurance carriers, or a combination of the same. This case went on for a period of time that it shouldn't have gone on to. We should have say, for example, a 90-day time period. From the time of a hearing, a decision is made. But it goes on for 6 months, 9 months. And
Scott, these are all common sense recommendations. They all make a lot of sense to anyone that just looks at this situation at first blush. Are they embodied in any piece of legislation now that's being proposed on Capitol Hill?
No.
Have you been in touch with legislators on the Hill to promote these particular recommendations?
Last week, I sent to all the House members and all the Senate members the letter I sent to the governor in December, and also sent the response from the governor's office. The following day after the letter, I mailed this card to all the House and Senate members, and I am trying to create interest. I have heard from 3 House members. Actually, I have not heard from any of the York County delegation.
Are any of the House members willing to run with those recommendations?
We actually met yesterday with 2 of the members in the House in Harrisburg, and there is interest, and we are going to put our workers' comp attorney in touch with one of the representatives' offices to move forward to see what we can do. Now, interesting, I'm a Republican, and I'm a large Republican.
Really?
Yeah, I'm a large Republican. Hard to believe. But actually, I heard from the first person I heard from was a House Democrat member, and we actually had a good meeting yesterday. And so, this isn't a Democrat or Republican problem. This is a PA business problem.
Yeah.
So, I was.
This is a problem about right and wrong.
This is a problem of right and wrong. So there are a lot of other, meat and potatoes things that aren't big, that aren't, overly big, items. We're not talking about changing the whole system.
Right.
We're talking about actually streamlining the system and making the system better than what it is.
Okay.
And in some situations, it's following the current rules that are there.
All right. Well, we thank you very much for talking with us and sharing your recommendations with our viewers, again, on this particular issue. And we'll be following the progress, and we hope to have you back really soon again, Scott. We'll see you again next week on Behind the Headlines.